As more and more begin to know, the status quo has got to go. They're bound to say yes to a man named Dr. No, a man who makes the establishment panic. Grassroots are growing way too wild, too organic.
Zelensky says no Ukraine election until the war is over. So Zelensky told the BBC last week that there will be no Ukrainian presidential election in 2024 if martial law is still in effect, which means no elections, until the war is over. So Zelensky's 5-year term is due to end in 2024, but his comments suggest that it will be extended indefinitely if the war is not over by then. And judging by the way things are right now, I don't expect this war to, come to an end this year. And Zelensky made similar comments about Ukraine's parliamentary elections, which are scheduled to be held in October 2023, so this year. And he made these comments actually in an interview with the Washington Post last month. So when he was asked if parliamentary elections will be held this fall, Zelensky said, quote, "If we have martial law, we cannot have elections. The Constitution prohibits any elections during martial law. If there is no martial law, then there will be," end quote. And I do not expect Zelensky to suddenly lift martial law while this war is going on. He's consolidated a lot of power during this war using these authorities that he's granted himself. The first major thing that he did in March 2022, he banned 11 opposition parties, including the leading opposition party in Ukraine's parliament that held 44 seats at the time. So got rid of them, and he nationalized the media so the government could have more control on the narrative that's being put out about the war. And since then, he's taken a lot of other steps. This crackdown on the Ukrainian Orthodox Church, the one that's historically linked to the Russian Orthodox Church, even though they denounced the invasion and severed their ties with the church in Russia, he's still been cracking down on them. There's a priest under house arrest, sanctioning the church, confiscating things that belong to the church, things like that. All right, the next one here, Lee Amendment takes on arms price gouging. So this article is over at Responsible Statecraft from William Horton. And Barbara Lee, the House representative from California, she has added an amendment to the House Appropriations. Sorry, wait, what's the bill here? Oh, the Defense Appropriations Act that was just passed by the House Appropriations Committee. And this amendment would look to address the price gouging that the U.S. arms makers have been doing, because they can get pretty much whatever they want out of the Pentagon. And there was recently that former official on 60 Minutes who kind of blew the whistle on it, even though, it's very clear that it's been going on, but he kind of shared some more details about it. But this proposal would require the Pentagon to report on excess payments to weapons contractors, including any actions taken to claw back overpayments or take disciplinary action against companies engaged in price gouging, as well as any cases that prompted referrals to the Justice Department for possible criminal action. So Hartung says that the information required by the Lee Amendment is essential to any meaningful effort to reduce or eliminate routine contractor overcharges. And he says, on the face of it, it's hard to see how any member of Congress could oppose such measures, but, we can count on the weapons industry to lobby against this. So Barbara Lee, it's a shame that she's been all in on the Ukraine stuff, because she was the one member of Congress in 2001, right after 9/11, to vote against giving President Bush the authorization to invade Afghanistan. And that 2001 authorization is still what the U.S. uses to wage war in Syria, Iraq, Somalia, Yemen, and countries across Africa. It's all that 2001 amendment. And she was the only one that voted against it. So again, it's kind of just a shame to see her voting to send all these weapons into Ukraine.
2349.
Prepare to set fire to the index card of allowable opinion. Your daily dose of liberty education starts here. The Tom Woods Show.
Seems like with states, we come across a constant thread of lies when it comes to why such wars need to be fought. So in June of 2016, a terrible event took place in Orlando, Florida, referred to as the Pulse nightclub massacre, in which 49 people were killed, 53 were injured, and Omar Mateen was a guy who pledged his allegiance to the Islamic State. And Barack Obama came out 4 days after the event and explained more or less what happened, saying, "This was an attack on the LGBT community. Americans were targeted because we're a country that has learned to welcome everyone, no matter who you are or who you love. And hatred towards people because of sexual orientation, regardless of where it comes from, is a betrayal of what's best in us." Turns out that Trump actually had more or less the same position. Trump on June 13th said, "This is a very dark moment in America's history. A radical Islamic terrorist targeted the nightclub not only because he wanted to kill Americans, but in order to execute gay and lesbian citizens because of their sexual orientation. It's a strike at the heart and soul of who we are as a nation. It's an assault on the ability of free people to live their lives, love who they want, and express their identity. So what you can actually do is falsify this and recognize that terrorism is something people do in order to amplify a message as opposed to conceal it, much like people do at protests. And here are the words of Omar Mateen in his 911 call while he's holding the hostages. He initiates a 911 call and says the following: "You have to tell America to stop bombing Syria and Iraq. They are killing a lot of innocent people. What am I to do here when my people are getting killed over there? You get what I'm saying? You need to stop the U.S. airstrikes. Tell the U.S. government to stop bombing. They are killing too many children. They are killing too many women, okay? I feel the pain of the people getting killed in Syria and Iraq. They need to stop bombing Syria and Iraq. The U.S. is collaborating with Russia, and they are killing innocent women and children, okay? The airstrikes need to stop and stop collaborating with Russia, okay? You see? Now you feel how it is. Now you feel how it is." So when it comes to were the governments in the war on terror just set out to protect us with spending trillions of dollars on bombs, killing tens of thousands of civilians, something that would be unthinkable to fund voluntarily. They put us in this situation and no one had to bear the cost. Very few people, if any, went to jail. Well, except people who actually exposed the lies about the war on terror, people like Chelsea Manning or Julian Assange. So when it comes to examples like this, we see constant deception in order to get people to not resist in funding state wars, makes them much more likely to occur. And because of schooling, people do not meet these statements from Barack Obama, from Donald Trump, with the level of skepticism they would if any other organization was making them.
And in this case, of course, it's very obvious why a political leader would want to confuse people as to what the motivations of the person are. Because in this case, of course, he can kill two birds with one stone. He can get a favored constituency to support him further by him portraying himself as their defender against a crazy person like this. And secondly, he can cover up what's really going on in foreign policy, which is what obviously did lead to the incident, was somebody being upset about that. So it makes perfect sense that somebody like an Obama or any other political leader would want to obscure the real nature of the thing.
Exactly. And because we have the primary source of the 911 call, it's just unbelievable that both the left and right came together to advocate a social justice angle, which is dislike or hatred of homosexuals, when the actual answer is so clear. Just as we saw so many people enlisting after 3,000 Americans died on 9/11, when tens of thousands of people in Iraq and Syria are killed by U.S. bombs, they also get the same feeling that we did. Even going back, this is not necessarily some recent phenomenon. A.J.B. Taylor wrote a book titled The Origins of the Second World War, and in it he summarizes the First World War. He says, the assassination of Franz Ferdinand provoked Austria-Hungary to declare war on Serbia. The Russian mobilization in support of Serbia provoked Germany to declare war on Russia and France, Russia's ally. The German refusal to respect Belgium neutrality provoked Great Britain to declare war on Germany. And just like that, in a matter of a couple of days, governments were able to spend tens of millions of dollars, conscript millions of people to fight a war that started because Franz Ferdinand was assassinated. Something, again, almost unthinkable in the voluntary sector, especially when you're dealing with conscript armies and people don't have the right to opt out. This is a war where Russia lost 1.8 million people, and all of those people were on the front fighting it out in this conflict. And the Bolsheviks were able to take over the capital in 1917 because they weren't defending the homeland. Another example of how wars can easily weaken empires, contrary to what Vivek Ramaswamy and Donald Trump like to say. Germany lost 2 million people. France, the number I believe is 1.3 million. The Habsburg Empire of Austria-Hungary, 1.1 million. The United Kingdom, 920,000 deaths. Italy, 460,000. And 116,000 Americans who came in towards the end of the war.
But on some level, everybody recognizes that after World War II, the British lost their empire.
Yeah.
And everybody, I mean, you have to understand that is because the war decimated them. So on some level, we get it.
And on another level, they say, those stupid Soviets got bogged down in an unwinnable war in Afghanistan in the late 70s and 80s. Also, war grows the economy, so you actually got to support the warfare state. They will say those things almost one right after the other.
Yeah.
Truth about Ukraine, if we didn't go to war and we didn't take on Poland, the guy on the throne would be someone like Viktor Yanukovych, or we could fight a huge, massive, bloody, deadly war, and the guy on the throne could be Vladimir Zelensky, who recently said that we're not sure if we're going to be able to have presidential elections in a time of war because that's not consistent with our constitution. It's conscripting men by the millions, confiscating property from the Orthodox Church, outlawed 11 political parties, and this is NATO's guy who's going to defend democracy. So that is Ponsonby's reason for why we actually see all this.
Here's Gerald Celente with today's trends in the news.
How we got here has happened a long time ago. as they kept pumping cheap money into the economy, particularly during the Great Recession, when they started lowering interest rates and made up some fucking shit, some fucking scumbag bankster shit called quantitative easing. How about go fuck yourself? Fuck you, Celente. We have to enrich the rich. That's all we're interested. You're nothing but a plantation worker on slave land here. So they artificially propped this thing up. This thing was crashing before the COVID war. You go back to 2019, Germany was that far away from recession, the fourth largest country economically in the world. There was a new world disorder, people taking to the streets in France, the yellow vests, in South Africa, in Algeria, in throughout South and Latin America, people taking to the streets. Lack of basic living standards, crime, government corruption, violence. Then the COVID war happens. We're going to make up some more fucking shit. We're little arrogant scumbag suck-ass pricks. We're little shits that couldn't fight our way out of a paper bag. We're fucks like Gutson Gavin Newsom locking down California. The fuckface from Italy that locked it down after the Chinese locked it down to stop the protests in Hong Kong. You forgot about that. No, we're fighting the COVID war. Don't you remember people falling in the street? Making up that shit? And then California. Then state of Washington. New York. One after another, these little fucking arrogant pricks. Fuck you! Fuck you, politician! Don't you tell me what to do. And any politician, now hear this, in the United States that wants to give me an order and make me do something, come over here and talk to me man to man and try to make me do it. I will not do anything that violates my Bill of Rights of the Constitution. My Bill of Rights of the Founding Fathers. You will not stop me from obeying it. They fucked this country up and they fucked the world up. The damage done by the COVID war is not being reported. Oh, and then I forgot the other war, the Ukraine war, where the fuckfaces put thousands of sanctions on Russia that have driven up the prices across the board on inflation. And then the COVID war, oh, supply chain disruptions. People ain't going to work. What supply chain disruptions? You're pumping fucking trillions of dollars into the economy to artificially prop it up. You're bringing interest rates down to zero and you kept them in negative. And you're wondering why the fuck there's inflation and we're going into recession as now you're raising interest rates? This is serious. And as I said, when all else fails, they take you to war. We are in World War III. What happened with this Wagner group, and now there's information that the United States intelligence knew about it. Did it have anything to do with it? And there's a great article in this week's Trends Journal by Dr. Paul Craig Roberts, former Assistant Treasury Secretary under Ronald Reagan. Seeing how Putin fucked up. They have just ramped up the Ukraine war. And now Russia's going to ramp it up as well. And this will really make you happy. This is just, as I'm going on the air, I want to see what the hell is going on. Russia Today. Sergei Karaganov. Here's why Russia has to consider launching a nuclear strike on Western Europe. Who is this guy? He's a professor and honorary chairman of Russia's Council on Foreign and Defense Policy. an academic supervisor at the School of International Economics and Foreign Affairs, Higher School of Economics in Moscow. Oh, is that great? I hope we never use nuclear weapons, but the fact that we refuse to allow their use in all situations except in the case of mortal danger to the state itself seems to me to be ridiculous. The U.S. is tying Russians' hands in this way, hoping that in the long run, this long war will cause an internal implosion. And as a result, this would radically weaken its main rival, China, which will be left to fend for itself. This is a strategic plan that is absolutely clear. And he goes on to talk about why they should use a nuclear weapon if they have to. So, what are you doing to bring peace on earth? Most people are too dumb or they're too self-absorbed to know the facts of what's going on. The people that subscribe to the Trends Journal and are listening to this channel, and please tell the people, tell your friends to subscribe to the channel, know what's going on. But most people don't have a clue.
In fact, right before I won't say the war broke out because it had been going on for quite a long time, but right before the war got much worse, a little more than a year ago, they launched an American satellite on a Russian rocket powered by a Ukrainian motor. And they've done the same thing October before that in 2021. And so this is the kind of cooperation that we ought to be able to go right back to. In fact, I believe that they at one point launched a rocket in the same sort of fashion during the war.
I'm glad you used that example because I probably was responsible for that.
Oh, good, thank you.
Because I'm sure that probably happened when I was chairman of the Space Subcommittee, and I was pushing for trying to be cooperative with them for peaceful projects like this.
So look, after Iraq War I, famously, Scooter Libby and Paul Wolfowitz and Zalmay Khalilzad wrote up this defense plan and guidance, otherwise known as the Wolfowitz Doctrine. This is America has to military dominate the entirety of the planet and allow no near-peer competitor ever again, and we'll attack them first. We'll do anything we can to disrupt them, because that is the only way to keep the peace, is for America, aka goodness, to hold crisis down. And so in other words, when we extend what a cynic might call American hegemony and protection of American interests into other spheres, they say, no, we're only protecting the liberal, rules-based international order of law and friendship and agreed upon agreements whereby the rules everybody's supposed to act. And anybody who's opposing that, they're the ones who are aggressing against the world order. So in other words, this world order is this objective thing that America is the steward and guardian of, rather than in any sense an empire exploiting and taking advantage and pushing their power into others' spheres of influence. It's very hard to make these two sides even understand each other's kind of point of view of the matter, never mind the other side, from Russia's side, looking at this coming toward them. So what do you think about all that?
I agree with that. That's the analysis of what it's like and what's going on. But what I would suggest is that the Russians should never have been, once they pulled their troops out of Eastern Europe, we should have changed our whole way of looking at them. But what you're saying is they kept the same way and same type of global strategy, even though the Russians had not proven themselves to want peace enough to pull all their troops out of Eastern Europe, for God's sakes.
Right.
And they proved it. And then and why didn't we do that? Because I think that, and that's where I agree with a lot of radical libertarians and everything, I think we've got a deep state. And it's not just that they're so idealistic they're protecting our country. No, I think there's a lot of profit being made from a lot of people who are profiting off a bad relationship, not a bad relationship, a threat, a global threat still coming from Russia.
Yeah. If I remember right, it was just a competing member of parliament who'd been talking shit about him, was all it was.
Oh, well, that could happen. Who knows?
I don't know. Ghani and Abdullah, we're both trying to kill each other as they're running for president. Neither of them would concede when the other one won. And they did that 2 elections in a row. And in fact, the election before that, Karzai had just told everybody, vote for me or we're going to kill you. And they just stuffed the ballots, and the whole thing was a goddamn hoax. That's 2009 and in 14, and then when they did it again in, whether it was, I think, 17 or late 16 when they did the election, and somebody's, throwing bombs at Ghani, and it was like Abdullah's guy doing it. Yeah, well, like Matt Bush and Gore throwing grenades at each other.
Well,
things I mentioned yesterday, the interesting thing to me was how emphatic it was that America, at this time, Biden had to make sure. You'd think, well, why would you have to be so defensive? We didn't do it. We didn't do it. We weren't there. Oh, we knew about it. We were smart enough. And we even briefed our members of Congress. But maybe they really decided they had to separate themselves once they realized that most American coups that they participate in are very successful.
Yeah.
You know, and this one, you'd have to say, didn't really, except we don't know exactly what was going on.
Yeah.
But it didn't turn out to be the overthrow of Putin's government.
Yeah. Put this first one up because this is something he put out yesterday. He said, let's replace the vicious cycle of escalation with a virtuous cycle of peace building. Senators Lindsey Graham and Richard Blumenthal just issued a resolution threatening Russia with dire consequences in response to its stationing of nuclear weapons in Belarus. I agree that Russia should remove those weapons. And as a first step, the U.S. can start removing its nukes from Germany, Italy, Belgium, Turkey, and the Netherlands, along with its new missile bases in Romania and Poland. That's his solution.
Well, I remember it well, the days going on the Cuban crisis on missiles, and also which within days it led up to me receiving a notice from our government saying, hey, you better quit your doctoring. You have to leave that for a while. Come join us because we're getting ready because it looks like it could be very bad news. That was before JFK and Brezhnev talked.
Yeah.
So that's how close they were. They were gearing up, but the fortunate thing was that they came up with a solution. At the time, you weren't allowed to know the solution because anybody who would have said we should back off out of fear from Turkey and not cut our missiles there, we should move them closer to Russia. That's argument still going on today. Yeah. Like we're in Ukraine. So they kept that secret, but then they said, Brezhnev was going to take the missiles out and everything's calmed down. But it didn't take too long for everybody to know that there was a deal worked out, and it was based on common sense and two people that still lived in the real world. They said, okay, because Brezhnev makes the point, you're in Turkey, you're in all these other places, and Kennedy had the brains to say, you're right about that. I'll bet we could do without those things. So he agrees to do it, and all of a sudden, the missile crisis was essentially over.
But Sachs mentioned that in this discussion between Kennedy and Khrushchev, Kennedy said, hey, I'll take these missiles out of Turkey, but as part of this deal, can you kind of keep that part quiet and secret? Because I'm facing a lot of stress at home. And to his credit, because we always think of these Soviet leaders as monsters, and I'm sure by and large they were, but he understood the benefit. And he said, okay, we'll do it, we'll keep it secret. And you're right, it lasted for a while. It finally came out that, yeah, it was a compromise. We didn't stare down the Soviets and they backed and blinked. No, it was a compromise. And that's why I think what RFK says here is so important. Bring back compromise.
Why exactly are we at war with Russia? It seems like there's a pretty significant downside to this particular foreign policy decision, starting with economic collapse and ending potentially with extinction. So is there a good reason we're doing it? So many innocent young people have been killed. So many hundreds of billions of dollars have been wasted, some of them from the U.S. Treasury. So what's the point? Are we really doing this so the Biden family can repay its debts to the oligarchs who finance their beach house in Rehoboth? Are we doing it so our government can continue to lie about its illicit biolabs in Eastern Europe? So that flabby losers like Toria Nuland and Tony Blinken can feel like they're doing something important with their sad, empty lives? Really? Honestly, there's got to be a better reason for waging this, the most pointless war of all. What is it? Well, thankfully, we have an answer. The war against Russia, ladies and gentlemen, the war against Putin and for Ukraine is in fact a war for democracy. Watch and recall the motive.
The President has said many times we're focused on what we can do to support Ukraine's effort to fight for their democracy.
Democracy must prevail.
It's a war for democracy. That explains it.
What percentage of the American people say, oh, that's good, I'm okay with that?
I would hate to guess.
But the thing of it is, that's shifting. A lot of people will do that. A lot of people have done it in the past. But I think that attitude is shifting, and they're starting to question when the government says it. Why should you believe it?
Ukraine is defending its sovereignty, freedom, democracy, culture, and nation. We must stand with Ukraine now more than ever. So they're fighting for their democracy, Dr. Paul. But guess what? Guess what happened yesterday? Put that next one on. They're fighting for their democracy, but Zelensky says no elections in Ukraine until the war is over. So we're fighting for the democracy and freedom of a country that has canceled all opposition, canceled all non-state media, and now actually cancels elections. So what kind of democracy is that?
This is something that goes on. We're not surprised, but the money is supposed to stop them. So it's this fake dependency and trust in the dollar that holds this whole thing together, because everything else is so weak and people tolerate, everybody gets bailed out. And COVID, think of the trillions of dollars they use to bail out. So nobody, I think they're totally numb about that.
250 Hollywood celebrities, Dr. Paul, sign a letter demanding the big tech censor anyone who opposes trans surgeries on kids. What do you think?
It still bewilders me why that should have a big deal, but I guess they think it does. Censor anyone who opposes trans on kids.
On kids, yeah.
That's how corrupt our morality is, and the movies and media and all this is an influence and a reflection of basic morality. Just like Congress is not a reflection of the Constitution, it's a reflection of where we are on a moral society. And it said that 61% of the U.S. voters believe that introducing children to transgenderism, drag shows, and LGBTQXYZ themed stunts their emotional and psychological. Unbelievable.
Oh, that's a shocker.
So that's what they found, but 61% of the people agree, so we'll work with them.
Yeah.
But then the poll also said, the polls also found that 63% of respondents believe that those advocating for children to be exposed to these issues are motivated, listen to this, purely by a desire to push a specific cultural agenda. And it's not our cultural agenda, let me tell you. A further poll found that almost 3/4, this is getting up the higher and higher, they want businesses to stay out of political and cultural issues, including LGBT. And you know that I was raised in a sort of a business. My dad has a small business, but it was early thing when I'd ask him about politics. You're going to run for this or that. Well, he says, it's just not a good thing to argue with your customers about Democrats and Republicans.
Smart man, very smart man.
So we weren't to bring that up with our customers.
Very smart.
But it shows that the people now are sick and tired of it, and they're tired of about what the football teams are doing and the beer companies are doing, and I don't know. I think it's going to come the way of people with common sense.
What Michael and I were looking at when they were looking through the Twitter files was something new, an internet age approach to political control that uses brute digital force to alter reality itself. We certainly saw plenty of examples of censorship and deplatforming and government collaboration in these efforts. However, it's clear that the idea behind the sweeping system of digital surveillance, combined with thousands or even millions of subtle rewards and punishments built into the online experience, is to condition people to censor themselves. It's exactly what the communists did, Dr. Paul, and I have used this quote in my announcement of our upcoming conference, which I mailed out to Ron Paul Institute subscribers. Put that last one on, because if you're interested in this and related topics, you will want to get your tickets for our September 2nd conference near the Dulles Airport in Dulles, D.C. Which Way America?
This came up during the presidential campaign when I was trying to make a different point about foreign policy after 9/11. Why don't we find out motives? What's going on there? And I brought up the subject that, we've been involved for a long time. Iran was being challenged too. And I said, well, you have to find out why they might be upset. I said, we were participating in a coup in 1953 and overthrew a Democratic leader that they had. And this has led to a lot of problems over there. And the talk show host was very conservative, very hawkish. He said, I don't want to hear any nonsense about history. So I had to shut up, couldn't talk about history, but they don't want to know anything about history. But this coup attempt is interesting because not too many people know it, but once it failed and the dust was trying to settle, our government couldn't wait to deny. We didn't have anything to do with it. We didn't have anything to do it. Now, if it would have been successful, they still wouldn't have talked about it. They just would have taken advantage of it. Maybe NATO had something to do with this. Maybe us egging them on, and maybe our disobedience to our promises made to Russia over many decades, maybe that has something to do with it. Now, that's off limits. So getting the truth out is the whole issue. The truth is very helpful to us, and that's why we like to to hear some of these reporters, and our conferences are set up that way to get people that they're going to talk about things you're not going to hear very often on the television, and try to understand why this happened, because we hear propaganda. I listen to all of it because I'm always looking for bits and pieces of truth. Sometimes you hear it by accident, sometimes it's planted there for a reason, and sometimes it might be a real shift in attitudes from people coming in our direction where they believe that the foreign policy should change. So the foreign policy of non-intervention is the policy that we advocate, just like we advocate the non-interventionist position on personal liberty, spiritual liberty, sexual liberty, and all these things, for us to stay out of that, economic liberty of all sorts, and believing very sincerely, if you want to live in a more peaceful and a more prosperous world, you would adhere to those principles. I want to thank everybody for tuning in today to the Liberty Report. Please come back soon.